An analysis of the fall of the House of Usher, Part 2. The fall of the House of Usher is about the decline and decay of the American aristocracy and the American dream. According to Google, the American dream is, quote, the ideal that every U.S. citizen should have an equal opportunity to achieve success and prosperity through hard work, determination, and initiative. The story addresses that fact that there is no place for an aristocratic, too pure bloodline in the American dream. In many ways, the story is like a three-act play. Act 1 introduces the characters, depicts the eerie effect of the House of Usher, the house has on its viewers and inhabitants, and apprises us of Roderick's family background and the general nature of his illness. In Act 2, the narrator quickly discovers the futility of cheering up Roderick. Nevertheless, he does not give up his mission of salvation. He spends several days in reading, watching him paint, listening to him play the guitar. The act concludes with Madeline's death and entombment. Act 3 takes place on a stormy night about a week after Madeline's burial. Usher is hysterical, and in an attempt to calm him, the narrator reads Mad Trist. The sounds of the tale are soon echoed by the sounds of Madeline escaping from her tomb. The story can be read as an allegory, the inward journey of a person's mind. As we move spatially from the outside of the house to the inside to the vaults, which represent the unconscious, and then back upstairs again, we are traveling through a person's psyche. The question Poe leaves open, however, is whose psyche, Usher's or the narrator's? On the surface, it would seem to be Usher's, but the narrator does not react normally either. 1, he waits too long before reacting to the bizarre incidents in the story. 2, why would he even go to Usher in the first place when, as he tells us, they haven't seen each other since childhood? 3, why is the twin sister a surprise if they knew each other as children? Poe raises in us some suspicions regarding the narrator. Regarding Usher, he tells us that his own illness is due to his love for his dying sister and that he cannot bear her departure. But then why does he bury her before she is dead and not assist her to escape her grave when he can hear her scratching? Clearly, from a psychological point of view, he wants her out of his sight. Her return marks his guilt and suffering and brings his own death. Why does the narrator stay through all of this? Is it perhaps his own unconscious fascination with his childhood friend's incestuous relationship with his sister? Perhaps the narrator has been infected with the disease of the House of Usher. Like many of Poe's other characters, Roderick Usher is guilty of a dreaded crime, the premature burial of his sister. Whether he knew he was burying her alive as he did so, or merely left her entombed after he became aware that she remained alive, does not change the monstrosity of his actions. The narrator, Usher's friend, is ultimately threatened by his association with Roderick, who makes him an accomplice to his crime. Over the course of the story, the narrator begins to take on the characteristics of Roderick as his own senses begin to heighten and he comes to share his friend's responses to the gloomy atmosphere of his house. His sanity is ultimately at risk as well. As Roderick and the narrator await Madeline's impending arrival on page 335, Roderick begins to shriek at the narrator, "Madman, madman!" His disturbing assertion that it is the narrator who is mad is one of the most shocking moments in the tale. To preserve his sanity, the narrator flees from the siblings' final embrace, which results in the destruction of the entire house of Usher. The principle of analogy is used effectively in this story when Poe compares the mansion and the family, finding an identical pattern in each, and when he takes the events in the book being read correspond to those going on in the house. Why is this story called The House of Usher and not Usher's House? Pondering that question would be a good journal topic. The story is full of symbolism. Poe is at his best in this story. It is perhaps the best story that he ever wrote. The Usher family and the Usher mansion are analogous, stained with time, used up, crumbling from within, awaiting collapse. Roderick and his sister Madeline, identical twins, are almost two faculties of the same soul, and then can be interpreted together as the soul of which the mansion is the body. All three decline together, and the inference is that the disappearance of one means the disappearance of the others, which in fact is what comes to pass. After Madeline has been entombed alive for some days, her return to her brother's study is orchestrated by a very clever device, the reading aloud of a legendary tale, the plot of which describes precisely the sounds she makes as she draws near. The door swings open, Madeline collapses against her brother, and they fall dead to the floor together. The narrator escapes just in time to look back and see the house of Usher disintegrate and slide underneath the waters of its tarn. The fall is a mosaic of incidents, psychological attitudes, symbols, all cemented into place in a unified structure according to the prescription of an exacting and skillful art. Poe's theory of the short story demands unity of effect, and here he achieves it as nowhere else. The story seems like a thesaurus of Gothic cliches: the lonely wanderer, the dreary landscape, the decaying castle, the reflecting tarn, a small mountain lake created by glaciers, and once inside the house, the weird inmates, the demented genius of the arts, and his sickly, spectral sister, the strange affinity between these spooks and their creepy house, the incestuous attachment so strongly hinted between them, her premature burial, the ghostly consequence between his music, painting, poem, and the snatch of wild romance read by the narrator, and the actions which overtake the hapless personages in their haunted house. This story also seems to be a thesaurus of nearly all Poe's obsessional motifs, here joined together in a dazzling, garish, and intricately consistent pattern of concentric meanings. As is true of nearly all of Poe's arabesques, the form of Usher is that of a confessional monologue. But unlike other monologues, the narrator of this tale is not its principal character. By means of this contrivance, Poe is enabled to endow his most subjective fiction with an air of objectivity. This is not the madman's confession, but the report by a sensible observer of the dire predicament of someone else. According to Richard Wilbur, the principal actor, Roderick Usher, is but an image of the narrator's own self. Quote, "We must understand the fall as a dream of the narrator's, in which he leaves behind him the waking physical world and journeys inward towards his internal self." That internal self is Roderick Usher. The narrator refers to Usher as, quote, "one of my boon companions in boyhood," and to himself as Usher's, quote, "best and indeed his only personal friend." The narrator is summoned to the house by a letter. Everywhere in Poe's tales, the sending of a letter is a report or summons from the soul. And now Usher has sent a letter summoning to his manse the long-lost boyhood companion. His letter is an appeal for help. Very little happens or is dramatized in the story. Everything is described or reported by the narrator. We should not be surprised by this, however, for what this is this tale but the dream which narrator, at Roderick's request, has traveled so far into the intricacy of the dreary darkness to dream. And what he reports has the fixated, tableau-like rigidity, the inexorability of a dream. It has also a dream's unremarked surprises and omissions. Most readers think it odd that Usher, who is as crazy as a bedbug, should call narrator a madman. But then, mad though he is, Usher knows more of the truth than the narrator, with all of his common sense, could possibly guess. And, seeing that narrator still has no idea what is happening, Usher, with the impatience of the visionary as well as with the terror of the hysteric, assails his imperceptive companion as mad. Usher could not become an artist until he had wished his sister dead. All along, having laid her in the vault, he knew her to be yet alive, but he had not rescued her. The Roderick we see in the narrator's story has not enough will, enough strength, enough resolution to do this or to do anything to save to create those ideational and visionary strains, images, and the rhymes evoked from his soul by the thought of his sister dying. He wanted to bury Madeline even as he knew her not yet to be dead. He has repressed this self-incriminating information, but it will out with the telltale beating of her heart. He cannot escape her vengeance now, as under the quote, potency of a spell, the panels of the door swing open. Madeline Usher, in her white robes stained with blood, quote, fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother, and in her violent and now final death agonies, bore him to the floor a corpse and a victim to the terrors he had anticipated. Madeline becomes Roderick's muse, but only when he can think of her as dying. This once again evokes Poe's prescribed theme for poetry, the death of beautiful women. Once Roderick inters his muse beyond, as he thinks, hope of escape, his lofty reason totters and his creative spell shatters. Unacknowledged guilt has broken him. So a final thought. Why does Roderick kill Madeline? Because he hopes that her death will end his unnatural obligation to a long line of ushers and allow him to break free despite his own inevitable death in the near future. Consider this point carefully in this week's discussion forum.